everybody. My name is Mark. This is Why I Hate the World. How you guys doing? So this is a video about Sandra Bland, and if you don't know the story with that, Sandra Bland was she was an anti police brutality activist who was traveling through a small town in Texas, and she was pulled over for failure to use her signal when changing lanes. And one thing led to another. She got arrested, and she ended up dead the next day in her cell. And the official cause of death is suicide by asphyxiation. She had a plastic bag over her head. Right. So now the way it looked in the beginning, it looked pretty bad for the cops. It basically looked like a cover-up, and they basically it looked like they beat her up and killed her and then made it look like she killed herself. But anyway, let's a few more facts about the story. So she was pulled over for not signaling, and what was happening was that the police car was coming up behind her really fast, and she pulled over to get out of the way so that the cop could go by, and the cop pulled her over for not signaling. So basically what this is, it's a trick. That it's a trick. Cops do shit like this when they're looking to give people tickets, right? You know, you ever go through a speed trap, you know, like you come around a sharp corner and there's a cop waiting behind a fucking billboard or some shit. Same kind of thing. So what the trick is, you know, the police officer's driving really fast. Looks like he's in an emergency. You know, he doesn't have his lights on, but it looks like, you know, he's hauling ass. He has to get somewhere quick. You move over so that he can go by, and then he nails you for not signaling. That's basically what happened, right? So that's bullshit to begin with. Anyway, so her problem was that they released some footage which has been edited. If you look, there's some pretty obvious edits in it of the cop's dash cam footage, and she's arguing with the police officer, right? And she made some mistakes here. So basically the cop tells her, you know, she gets pissed off at him. The cop tells her to put out her cigarette and to get out of the car, and she starts refusing, saying, no, I don't have to do that, you know. So that admittedly was her problem. When a cop tells you to do something like that, that's actually the law. You know, they have, it's been held up in the Supreme Court. I'm not sure what the actual court number is, but a cop does have the right to tell you to do things like, you know, put out that cigarette, take off those sunglasses, take off that hat, you know, turn down that music, stuff like that. They do have that right, because it has to do with the officer's safety, you know. And these are all things that people could be using to cover up other things, you know. For example, smoking a cigarette, you could be using that to cover up the smell of drugs or some shit, you know. Or wearing sunglasses, right? You could be doing that to, like, cover your eyes being red or some shit like that. So yeah, that is something that's been held up by the court, and that was a mistake on her part, right? So, but anyway, she refuses to do this stuff. She refuses to you know, put out the cigarette. Then the cop tells her to get out of the car, and then he pulls out his taser, and while she's sitting there arguing, right? Because remember, she got pulled over for not signaling, right? And he's going, get out of the car, and then he pulls out his taser and goes, I'll light you up, is what he says. And so she gets out of the car, and then some other shit happens, and he ends up throwing her on the ground and handcuffing her and stuff, right? So that was exactly the quote was, I'll light you up, you know. So just remember that this is a traffic stop, and the shit escalated, right? So now she's arrested. Her wrists were cut because he put the handcuffs on too tight. That's another trick that cops do. You know, when they want to fuck with you, they'll put the handcuffs on too tight so they fucks you up. You know, another thing they'll do is they'll put you in the back of the car, and then they'll take turns really sharp, so you'll be a lot of, you know, banging around and fucking. There was a case a little while ago about a guy who died when that stuff was happening. So already, you know, the fact that she had cuts on her wrist shows, like, that's evidence of how they were treating her, right? So then she gets taken to this jail, which has been investigated in the past for having problems with race. And this particular like precinct, you know, and the next day she's dead, right? And they say, okay, well, you know, she committed suicide. So at first, I mean, to anybody out there, right, especially with this rash of police brutality cases, your first reaction is like, okay, they killed her, you know, they probably beat her to death and then like tried to cover it up. But it's not that cut and dry. What it looks like to me, because apparently they did an autopsy on her and she had a lot of THC in her system. Like she had like 3 times what like you would normally, like a normal person who smokes a joint would have. Like, so that's kind of suspect right there. It's like, well, how come she has so much THC in her system? You know, which is like, and the autopsy was done like, you know, 3 or 4 days later. That it's not supposed to persist that long. So she must, but if you look at the video of her getting arrested, she's obviously not stoned. I mean, the amount of THC in her body would mean that she would have to be like really, really stoned. Like she wouldn't be able to drive, you know? I don't know, maybe she could have. Maybe some people can drive when they're really stoned. Who knows, you know? But that's kind of suspect. The other thing was that she was on some antidepressant. She had epilepsy, and one of the drugs she took was called Keppra. And one of the warning label on that particular medicine says that if you stop taking it, it can be really, really harmful. And one of the symptoms is that one of the side effects of this drug is thoughts about suicide. Okay, so there you go. Now it starts taking shape, right? You know, mood changes, depression, thoughts about harming yourself. This is on the warning label of this particular medicine, right? So now it starts, you know, now you start seeing what actually really happened. They probably didn't kill her, okay? They probably roughed her up a bit, took her to this jail, right? This is what it looks like to me. This is what it looks like what happened. The cop pulls her over because he has to make a quota, so he pulls her over for a bullshit reason to give her a ticket. She decides to fucking, you know, to not be cooperative, right? And it pisses the police officer off. So he decides he's going to teach her a lesson, right? Arrests her for a dumb shit reason, and she probably would have been out in a couple of days, or, you know, however long it was. She probably would have been released the next day, you know. Basically decided that he was going to, like, you know, teach her a lesson. That's what he did, right? You know, so decides to fuck with her, takes her out of the car, puts the handcuffs on too tight, whatever, you know, slams on the ground, brings her into prison, right? Then they put her in the cell and they don't give her her medicine, right? And because I guess she had the drugs on her, you know, like as part of her, like in her purse or something. They throw her in the cell, they don't give her her medicine, she fucking loses her mind, you know. She starts getting suicidal thoughts and she kills herself. That seems really plausible to me. Either way, the police are responsible for her death. Whether they killed her on purpose, whether she killed herself because she didn't get her medicine, they're responsible. That's the way I see it. You know, whether there's criminal charges involved in that, I don't know, because that could have been a completely unintended consequence. You know, it seems highly unlikely to me after reading and seeing what the situation is that they killed her on purpose. You know, because some people are leaping at that conclusion, saying it's a cover-up and, you know, they beat her to death and blah 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 blah. It doesn't look like that. It looks like it looks like to me that they didn't give her her medicine, and one of the side effects of not getting this, of stopping this particular drug, you know, cold turkey, is that you start getting suicidal thoughts, and that's what happened. And it's bullshit. It's bullshit both ways, from, you know, all ways from Sunday. I mean, the thing is, they never should have pulled her over in the first place. You know, I mean, I guess it just kind of goes to show, you know, when police officers, you know, any interaction with a cop can have very, very bad consequences. You know, I guess that's what it really, really shows. It's like, you would think that, you know, pulling somebody over and giving them a ticket, it would just be a standard thing that happens all the time. not really. You know, one thing leads to another, and you can end up dead for a fucking bullshit reason. Why is this person dead? You know, because why? Because the cop needed to fill a quota for his tickets. That's why, all right? It just seems ridiculous to me that something like this even happens in this day and age, you know, like, that we even live in a country that shit like this can happen. I mean, even if they do arrest her, they should have, like, given her fucking medicine. I mean, seriously. It seems to me that somebody like that would, you know, it's highly unlikely to me that she wouldn't have asked for the medicine. I bet you $1,000,000 she has, and it's probably on video somewhere, and that's what they edited out. Anyway, it's a fucked up situation, and I hope those people responsible for this get held, you know, I hope they get held responsible, right, for this woman dying. If it's not a criminal, I don't know if this is necessarily a criminal case, but her family, at least I think, has grounds for legal action as far as suing the living shit out of this police department. You know, I mean, that kind of sucks, but sometimes that's the only recourse there is, you know, is monetary, you know, because I don't think in this case you'll be able to prove criminal, you know, intent or criminal negligence or whatever, but in the least case it would be what do you call that, manslaughter or something like that. Or anyway, it's all fucked up. Adios, folks.